that is our English speech senior. Topic, as you all know, that topic is non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. The time limit will be 6 to 7 minutes. You all know that speaking lesser, 30 seconds lesser or 30 seconds over time will be actually getting you a disqualification. So don't get into that trap. Enjoy your performances. You all must have prepared well. I am sure, I trust that. And first person who is coming is from Maheshwari Public School, Jaipur. If they are there, please unmute yourself and show that you are here. Okay. Final call for Maheshwari Public School, Jaipur, India. No response. We're moving ahead. Our own English High School, Sharjah girls. Are you there? Our own English High School, Sharjah girls. Final call for our own English school, High School, Sharjah girls. Moving on, Shri Venkateshwar International School, Delhi.
Yes, sir.
Amazing. You have a husky voice, boy. You scared me. So spotlight is right on you, Manas Kapoor, and all the best to you. Enjoy your time, dear.
Shall I start, sir?
You may start.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Manas Kapoor, and today I will be speaking about the topic non-violence is a flop, but only the bigger flop is violence. This quote presented by John Beers rings well today. Subjectively, if we look at it, both non-violence and violence are flawed and are rightly criticized. But the fact of the matter is that out of the two, non-violence works, but not at the level where we can arrogate it as a philosophy that is successful, which it clearly isn't. Because if we look at the other side of the argument, we can clearly see that even though the practice of non-violence has failed obscene amount of times, but not as much as violence has. At its core, the idea of non-violence seems imploring and one that could work on paper. But violence, on the other hand, is flawed in its ideological core, which clearly makes it the bigger flop. And civil turbulence and a huge number of people resorting to a mean that is clearly not ethical in any shape or form is not correct. But you might ask, if violence is the bigger flop, then why do we still resort to wars or riots that aren't clearly peaceful? And that is because of the fundamentals of the human psychology, which states that the human brain thinks force brings spotlight. And that's why it will be successful for the loudest in the crowd. And that is true for a 3-month-old crying, flailing his arms for food, or a gargantuan protest filled with adults to take down a government regime. And it should come with no surprise that most violent protests started off in non-violent ways. But when the authorities did not listen, when their demands were not met, that's when the people thought they needed to be loudest. They needed to be louder. And that is when these protests turned violent. Because they were non-violent, then they failed, and then they turned violent. It's an entire chronology. Even if a non-violent protest fails, a handful of its demands are still conformed to. But if it turns violent, it causes superfluous, gratuitous violence and bloodshed that no one asked for, and no one ever will. In the words of Dalai Lama himself, it's a story with a simple truth. Violence is a dead end. And to further support my argument of how non-violence fails, I would like to include the example of Tiananmen Square. Thousands of students gathered in a peaceful protest. And what happened? Did the authorities listen? They did not. Actual tanks were sent on the roads to curb students of all people. Students! Which hence proves the fact that non-violence failed and violence then ruined it further. I would further move to the symbol of peace, Mahatma Gandhi, whose birth anniversary we celebrate today, the International Non-Violence Day. The Gandhian philosophy says that violence has or never will have any solution to anything. But non-violence can achieve everything. This statement has been proved false too. Because if I were to remind you of the non-cooperation movement, which took place in February 1922, one of the fundamental movements that brought about India's independence, it started off peacefully, but once it completely reached the masses, it turned violent. And the Chauri Chaura incident took place. Therefore, if the flag bearer of non-violence cannot stop the citizens to act like uncivilized animals, then it goes to show that nothing can stop violence, non-violence from failing, and then violence comes in and digs its grave and puts it 6 feet under the ground. Going to another example of India and how the Indian partition divided a country whose leaders stood for non-violence, peace, tranquility. But partition took away all of that. It divided the country in a ruthless and violent manner. It effaced the entire ideology of non-violence, and this gaping hole has never been fixed. And yet we do not have a better alternative to work, to raise our voices with, without devolving into violence. Well, there is. There is only one fix to this problem, and that is realization, which worked great for Ashoka. But look, after so much bloodshed in the Kalinga War, he finally realized, which just beautifully explains how everything comes full circle. And so has this topic. We started talking about how non-violence brought about violence, and now we are finishing on how violence brings about non-violence. This full circle is achieved when we are in dire need of peace, when enough violence is caused, when enough bloodshed is caused, when enough lives are martyred. Then when we have a dire need of peace, then only we start to think about non-violence for once. And that is all because of realization, which once again proves the point that non-violence has failed completely, but violence has failed us much more. So to sum it up, looking at it from a pessimist's eyes, both ideologies and philosophies have failed miserably. But non-violence never causes as much trauma to humankind as violence does. Begin to believe that the quest for non-violence cannot be finished. Possibly at this crucial juncture, we are passing through some sort of inner churning. However, I believe that the quest for non-violence can never be finished. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you, dear. Must be very tired now. Yes or no?
No, sir.
You're not? You have amazing voice quality. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on, we have next participant. Can you mute yourself, dear? May I request?
Yes, sir.
May I request everybody to please mute themselves other than the next contestant? Okay, next contestant. No, Ravindra Rao, I can hear some sound there. We have next contestant from Air Force Balbhati School. Is it true?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So shine, dear, and make us proud.
Yes, sir. May I start?
You may.
The only thing that's been a worse flop than the organization of non-violence has been the organization of violence. This quote was coined by American singer and songwriter John Mays, respected judges, dignitaries, and their guest gathering. Today, I am going to speak on the topic. Non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Turkey and Russia pressed over a new age of mercenary wars. Washington Post. The US and China could slip into a new Cold War that pushes countries to pick sides. CNBC. World War Alert. Conflict intensifies between neighboring countries. Z News. These headlines must have arrested your attention. These headlines must have brought up the anxiety and fear of war and violence. It's no new fact that violence brings a state of disaster, mass destruction, loss of lives, and leaves a long-lasting effect on the economy. Wars subverts democracy and promotes tyranny and fanaticism. But what must one do to cure this keystone problem? The principle of non-violence. Non-violence rejects the use of physical violence in order to achieve social or political change, often describes as the politics of the ordinary. This form of social struggle has been adopted by a mass population throughout the world. Non-violence has to be recognized for social justice. It's been recognized as a powerful strategy for transforming and addressing societies. During the 20th century, the successful movements led by Gandhi in India and Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States led to the public's realization of completely new dimensions of non-violent conflict resolutions. We are living in an era where social, cultural, and political spheres are void of spirituality. But Gandhi's non-violence still spheres us to an ideal that may uphold. Gandhi remains the prophetic voice of the 21st century, and this non-violence urges us to continue and struggling on behalf of what we view as right and just. At a time when mankind is confronted with clashes of national interest, religious fundamentalism, and ethnic and racial prejudices, non-violence can be a well-trusted means of laying the groundwork of a new cosmopolitics. Though many continue to believe that non-violence is an ineffective instrument, it is an ineffective or the general initiatives, which were promised of non-violent militancy and an affirmation to the society of ethical foundations. This could be associated with a kind of neo-Gandhian quest for peace and justice. When we examine where we are today, given the politics and the technology of violence, we can conclude that in a world with no wisdom, the time has come for humanity to renew its commitment politically, economically, and culturally. Gandhi said, "There is no hope for the aching world except the narrow and straight path of non-violence." If we want to reap the harvest of the dialogical coexistence in the future, we will have to sow the seeds of non-violence. 60 years after Gandhi's death, we face a choice. Over the past 3 decades, global terrorism, violation of human rights, and environmental degradation has lost the global politics of complete sense of non-violence. Most importantly, the international community has the moral obligation and duty to intervene if the countries slide into lawlessness and cannot protect its citizens from violations of human rights. Only a non-violent society can weigh its work up by creating the institutions ripe for development and lead to intercultural and interreligious harmony. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, once again, non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of the man. Though many still continue to believe that non-violence is an effective material and an affirmation of human rights and foundations, this could be still associated with the neo-Gandhian quest for peace and justice. I'd like to point out that even though we're living in a world where terrorism is at its peak, racial prejudice is still on the run, non-violence still has given us the opportunity to seize the moment and make the world a better place for us to live in. I'd like to conclude by saying that on the last day, and because of the way we've been living for the past throughout the centuries, non-violence is effective. I completely agree with the statement that non-violence is a flaw, but violence is a bigger flaw. And according to me, non-violence is the only thing acceptable which can combat violence. Therefore, today, on the International Non-Violence Day, it's our duty to remind ourselves that violence has dangerous ramifications, not only on an individual or not only on a nation's, but also on a 60-year-old girl like me. It depends on my growth. Now it's up to the society, the world to think that whether they choose to raise young minds like me in a world surrounded by militancy, wars, but rather of non-violence, where art is pressured, where words have meaning, and humanity doesn't lose its meaning. At the end, I'll just say this. Non-violence is the key for a better future, and it's up to us to make it a better world for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Air Force Balbhati School, New Delhi. Next coming up is Scholar Indian School, Ras Al Khaimah. Can we quickly see the child from Ras Al Khaimah? You have been spotlighted. Enjoy your time. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. A warm good afternoon to all present in this platform. I'm Hannah Joanne, a ninth grader from Scholars Indian School, Ras Al Khaimah. As we all know, today we are celebrating Gandhi Jayanti, the birth anniversary of a global giant for justice, respect for diversity, and fundamental human rights. This day is also celebrated as the International Day of Non-Violence all over the world, declared by the United Nations on 15 July 2007. The purpose of this is to spread Gandhiji's philosophies, his teachings of non-violence and peace all over the world. Gandhiji advocated for non-violence and inspired many history makers such as Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and many more. On this special occasion, I'm here to share my thoughts on the given topic. Non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence, said by the social activist Joanne Baez. Non-violence is the way of humanizing human society. It is inventive. Since Gandhi and Martin Luther King, countless men and women have found ways to take non-violent action both in their daily life and in order to obtain more justice from their societies. Seeking compromise, boycotts, non-cooperation, hunger strikes, civil disobedience. There is a long list of options for those wishing to train in non-violent action. The maimed, the blind, and the bedridden cannot join the army of violence. There is also an age limit for serving in the army. For a non-violent struggle, there is no age limit. The blind, the maimed, and the bedridden may serve. When the spirit of non-violence pervades the people and actually begins to work, its effect is visible to all. But it would be wrong to say that non-violence is a weapon of the weak. The use of non-violence requires greater bravery than that of violence. Professor Jean Sharp, a leading scholar on non-violent resistance, defined non-violence as a technique by which people who reject passivity and submission and who see struggle as essential can raise their conflict without violence. The principle of non-violence rejects the use of physical violence in order to achieve social or political change. Often described as the politics of the ordinary people, This form of social struggle has been adopted by mass populations all over the world in campaigns for social justice. In Sharpeville, South Africa, in 1960, police opened fire on 5,000 unarmed Africans at a peaceful rally, killing 67 demonstrators. In Tiananmen Square, in 1989, the Chinese People's Army opened fire on non-violent protesters, killing between 300 and 1,700 people. But can these acts of violence mean the failure of non-violence? The Sharpeville massacre was broadcasted around the world and both isolated South Africa and encouraged economic sanctions, though freedom was not to come for 33 years. In China, however, 12 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre, none of the democratic reforms sought by the student demonstrators have been achieved. Being non-violent does not mean that you might not become a victim of violence. That risk is something all non-violent activists have confronted and accepted. We do not define failure of non-violence as the killing of non-violent people, but we do consider them as failures those cases in which such deaths stopped the non-violent movement. When there is only a choice between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence, said Gandhi, before adding, but I believe that non-violence is infinitely superior to violence. Non-violence allows you to be neither cowardly nor violent. It is passivity that is the common enemy of non-violence. Taking it to the extreme, real courage means putting your life at the risk so as not to kill instead of killing so as not to die. Courage grows stronger every day. It is a source of joy as those that foster it spirit around them like an incomparable moral force. Let's stand up for what is right and work together for a world of lasting justice, peace, and prosperity for all. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you, dear. Thank you very much. Can we clap for the girl and all the other participants, those who have spoken so very well? Now we are up for the next, that is from, one second, let me spot her first. She's from your Army Public School. The thing is coming up opposite. So can you correct that?
Yes, sir.
Just mirror, image mirror, you can change it. Put it to mirror image.
Sir, actually, I can see it right.
But here it is showing opposite. So if you can push, you see it wrong.
Yeah, it is opposite here. The mirror image is coming.
Unmute yourself.
Sir, if you can just give me a second, I'll change it.
No problem, no problem. Please take your time.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, this is perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome girl from Army Public School, Kirti. That is Arya Kale. Over to you, dear. Enjoy.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary, but the evil it does is permanent. A very good afternoon to one and all present here. Today, I, Arya Kale, representing Army Public School, Kalki, India, will be speaking on the topic, non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Let me start by asking a simple question. When our hands or feet hurt, do we heal them, put on medicines, or do we cut them off? The answer to this seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Then why do we as humans set out on a path of destroying our own kind the moment we face any kind of conflict of thoughts or beliefs? Why do we refuse to use the one powerful tool that humanity, out of all living beings, has been gifted with? Clear communication. Today, we are gathered here virtually to speak on non-violence and commemorate the day on which the greatest propagator of non-violence to have ever lived, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, was born. To understand Gandhi's non-violence, let us look at what violence is first. What is violence? How many of you think that violence is the showering of bombs and bullets on each other between two countries, two regions, and two religions? Well, let me tell you something. Today, the violence we speak of is none of these. Today, the violence we speak of is the violence within ourselves. The violence which is not a weapon and not an action. Let us take a moment and look at the violence which has been committed in the history of mankind so far. The kind of barbaric destruction caused by the two world wars. The dropping of nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which killed thousands in a matter of seconds and destroyed millions of lives for even the generations to come. As we have seen in the mass genocides committed by the Nazis, the 9/11 attacks, and the numerous civil wars, some of which rage on even today, communities, societies, and nations have paid tremendous costs of violence by loss of lives and destruction of nature. Violence is what you get when you feed your anger, fears, insecurities, and jealousy. And today, it saddens me deeply to say that somewhere along the road, we humans developed a culture of feeding these emotions. Now that we have seen the kind of impact this evil has had on our lives, let's talk about change. Let's talk about breaking down this culture of violence and building a world which can grow and progress without destroying each other. So now, how do we bring about this revolution of change? How do we stand up for what's right? The answer to this can be summed up in two simple words: non-violence. Talking about non-violence, I would like to quote Martin Luther King Jr. by saying, non-violence means avoiding not only external physical violence, but internal violence of spirit. You not only refuse to shoot a man, you refuse to hate him. 200 years of British rule in India was ended by Mahatma Gandhi. The battle for civil rights and equality for African Americans in the United States was led by Martin Luther King Jr. The apartheid system in South Africa was broken down and abolished by Nelson Mandela. And numerous such oppressive regimes were destroyed through non-violent struggles in the form of peaceful demonstrations, civil disobedience movements, and non-cooperation movements. And just like that, without budging from the path of non-violence, the foundation for a more peaceful and harmonious world was laid down for us by our great leaders. If such revolutionary changes could take place in the past, then why can't we do it today? Why can't we start right from the grassroots levels of teaching our children to live peacefully and bring non-violence to the international tables and solve disputes through communication, negotiation, and most importantly, Learn to accommodate opposing points of views. I would like to conclude by saying, in this night of increasing darkness, let us make non-violence our guiding star. Let us, as the youth of the world, be the carriers of change, be the revolutionaries, and make the world a better place for each and every person to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Arya Kale. Next coming up is City School Ajman. City School Ajman, this is a call for you. Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, the spotlight is on you. So next, ladies and gentlemen, is Marwa Lukman. Marwa, this picture doesn't suit you actually. You look beautiful otherwise. Okay,
Sorry,
this is
sir?
better. This is better. Now, are you ready? No, it's sometimes you are switching between your picture. You are putting your video off.
So is it fine now?
Yeah, it is fine. Stay like this only. Do not turn it to the picture, the skeleton picture.
Okay,
Okay, all the best. Enjoy.
thank you. Good morning. War can cause conflict and can conduct a very big destruction over a country. But what is the main reason behind a war? It can be because when people's rights are violated or abused, when a country is occupied, or when they are oppressed or humiliated. Now, how do they fight against to get their rights? They need a powerful way to assist and to fight back. Now, we cannot just come up and say to end war, to get back our rights. We cannot just say that violence is morally wrong. This is not the option. But, however, we can use non-violent system to conduct conflicts by giving an example, by showing them, by teaching our future children that violence should not be always an option. Most people associate their movement with Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Let me give you an example of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi has conducted Salt March to fight for salt, which was given tax when people could not really afford it. But how was it done? Non-violence way, peacefully. When he conducted a number of people who salt march with just wearing a white shirt, white. And now, in fact, most of the rights we as women have it was not just handed to us. We as women, as minorities, as the co-workers or leaders were not just given to us. It was fought for with non-violence way. Majority people don't agree that non-violence works. Why? Because when they conducted non-violence, over the past years, when they conducted non-violence, people were either shut down, they were stopped, or jailed. And that way, non-violence did not work. That's why many people do not agree that non-violence is always that works. There is always a right solution. But I have been greatly inspired by the people's creativity and bravery by using non-violent action in nearly every country in the world. People who protest, especially with goal to achieve either to rights that they need or freedom, or to ban or to get the rights of and equality, has been shown a great example of bravery. Now, when people goes for protest, it's not just a thing that you will come up and start protesting. Each participants who are there in for protesting, boycott or strike must choose a clear objective, should be determined to get what they want. Now, now either the rights may be given or not. That's not always the main goal. It's that how much effort you show when you are a part of being in the protesting community. And also, the leadership should have clear objectives to fight for. With this, I conclude with with a quote by Mahatma Gandhi. Strength does not come from physical capacity. It comes from a strong will from your heart. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much. That was City School Ajman in UAE. Next coming up is, let me open my file again. We have Alcon Public School. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Let me put a spot on you. No, well, let me do it once again. You are already spotlighted. You are in the focus. Enjoy your time, dear.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot. As Mahatma Gandhi ji once quoted, there are many causes I would die for, but very less that I would kill for. A very good evening to one and all present here. Respected judges, teachers, and my dear friends. Today I, Akshat Bhushan Sinha, a student of class 11th from Alcon Public School, New Delhi, India, would like to present my views on the topic. Non-violence is a flop, but the only bigger flop is violence. The topic itself has various fundaments hidden within it. Non-violence may have failed to bring the changes we expected from it, but it is better than the mayhem and chaos caused by violence. This is what the topic is about. Non-violence may not have been as effective, but it has for sure instilled a sense of cooperation and harmony among people in widespread nations across the globe. It is very unfortunate to see the current scenario of humanity across the globe, with terrorism at its peak, assaults like never before, and humanity on the verge of ceasing to exist. War has never done any good to us, and yet we choose violent behavior. And for what? Just to make us and our fellow citizens more vulnerable than what they already are. I think that's what separates us from the other living animals and beings. The ability to instill emotions, the ability to tame our mind, and the ability to energize the atmosphere. And yet we choose this violent behavior, putting at cost everything that the country, that the world, that the universe has. The only source of technology currently known. For what? That's a question I would like to trigger today. Let me take you back to the golden Indian mythology, Mahabharata. Lord Krishna took all measures so that war is withdrawn. But a veil was thrown over the minds of Kauravas and war prevailed. A simple war just for 5 villages turned out to be a massacre of thousands, assault of a lady, and partition between brothers. Mahabharata ends with the death of Lord Krishna and accession of Pandavas to heaven. Doesn't the whole purpose of war seem so null and void? Take any war of history for that example, World War I, Pearl Harbor, World War II. No war has ever done any good. It has never led to spark of life in any sense. And as Bapu once said, an eye for an eye will end up making the whole world blind. The leaders today have become so selfish in their motives that they put at stake everything that has brought them to that level. They put at stake the economy, the manpower, the backbone of the country. Let's take the example of Syria. I came across a picture when a journalist asked the girl to smile, and there were tears in that smile. That's what humanity has come down to. That is violence. That is what violence is doing to mankind. Let me take an example of something Ramdhari Singh Dinkarji wrote in Rashmi Rathi. जब नाश मनुज पर छाता है पहले विवेक मर जाता है. Meaning, when destruction prevails the human mind, the only end to it is the loss of sense and humanity. We must see, is that what we have become today? Have we let destruction control our minds and our countries? Non-violence is both a principle and a practice. The principle of non-violence affirms the active use of non-cursive and non-aggressive means to create a more profound context. It is based on the assumption that either today, tomorrow, or any time, justice and peace shall prevail. That is the trust people have in non-violence. In practice, non-violence is not actively showing resistance against a thing. Non-violence has a bigger prospect. It is finding the violence within yourself, eliminating it, and not letting it return to your body. Non-violence has come to be recognized as a very powerful strategy for students and people across the globe. The successful social movements of Gandhiji in 20th century and Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States led to the public's realization of completely new dimensions of non-violent conflict resolution. On this auspicious occasion of 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, I would like to state one of the very famous bhajans, a line from it to be precise. वैष्णव जन तो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने रे पर दुखे उपकार करे तोए मन अभिमान ना आने रे. Literally meaning one who is a true devotee to God, which Mahatma Gandhi described something which resides among us, knows the pain of others, does good to others without letting pride enter his mind. The equality for humans and the idea of preaching non-violence has always been reflected in the thought of the father of a nation. And I think that's what us as Indians have received from him. To this day, Indians may be portrayed as violent, but the teachings of Indian languages or any Indian, as we say, call it Sanskriti, has only and only preachings of non-violence and cooperation and harmony. With this, I would like to end my speech. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was Elkin Public School, Delhi. We are moving ahead and calling our own English High School boys branch.
So,
are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One second. Let me spotlight you. Okay, you look handsome. All the best.
Am I audible and visible, sir?
You are amazing.
Thank you, sir. I'll start now. Non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Respected judges, members of the audience, and my fellow opponents. My name is Farzeen Ajman Khan, and one of the many wonders of language to me that will always remain mysteriously incomprehensible is that there exist sentences that elicit a strong emotional response from you, but you can't understand or articulate why. I was faced with a similar predicament when preparing for this topic. You see, I thought that deep down I believed in the opposite of what this quote stood for. Somewhere along I picked up that a non-violent path was the ideal remedy to a majority of the world's troubles. And why wouldn't I? On paper, the concept is near perfect. Ideologically, taking a non-violent approach eliminates a plethora of issues violent means may offer. because you're essentially reaching the same conclusion while minimizing the catastrophic potential consequences a violent encounter may provide in the course of the same world. And then I made the mistake of asking other people what they thought about this topic. And I made this incredible discovery that blew my mind. I found out different people have different opinions on the same topic. Groundbreaking, I know. But this upset my original course of action, and I had to resort to a different way of writing the speech. One in which I laid down arguments from both sides of the spectrum and use them to analyze the age-old question of what exactly is the ideal, the best course of action to take when advocating for change. The answer obviously isn't as easy as it seems. Contrary to what we'd like to believe, non-violent means of standing up to your oppressors come with their own problems. What we need to understand is that in most cases, oppressors are also the people who are more in number, with access to more resources, with access to more privileges. And in these cases, it's really easy for people to dismiss your struggle and your cause because it simply does not make enough of an impact. An impact which perhaps a violent movement would have stirred up in the same scenario. Which reminds me of when I was younger, my solution to resolving something that bothered me was to sit in a corner and not talk to anyone for hours, incorrectly assuming that my sulking would cause people to notice and induce change. Of course, I know better now. I'm older, I'm 17, and it makes me proud to say that I've not sulked in over 16 hours. You see, mass agitation is also a problem. A major issue associated with non-violent struggles is that unless you have a large enough group of people who believe in your cause, who are willing to work towards it, it's really hard for your struggle to even get noticed. Taking a page out of history, Indian independence wasn't achieved by the first non-violent movement. There were a large number of campaigns, even before the civil disobedience movement of 1930, campaigns that failed because they couldn't muster enough support from people, or rather support to make meaningful change. I even believe that non-violent struggles have set an unhealthy precedent of resolving issues that oppressors and their supporters can use to their advantage. What we need to understand is that just because historically non-violent means have succeeded in inducing change does not mean that we can question the justification of communities today that are forced to resort to violent means while advocating for, in some cases, even basic human rights. Non-violence then is inherently flawed than we originally were led to believe. But obviously, the other side of the spectrum is almost more disadvantages. I know that today, on the International Day of Non-Violence, I don't have to stress much on the consequences and the inherent moral conundrums associated with a violent movement. But I think that the greatest disadvantage to protests that employ violent methods is that it's really easy for your oppressors to isolate your cause from your means. Going back to my point about how people in power are the one with access to more resources and hence more control on propagation of information, it becomes almost effortless for these individuals to label and persecute minorities solely for violence they committed in the course of their struggle. Case in point, the Black Lives Matter movement. The media was saturated with stories of riots and looting, completely ignoring the staggering amount of peaceful protests held around the world for the same cause. Ladies and gentlemen, then, is there simply no right answer to this question? I could take the pessimistic, easy route to tell you that there simply exists no ideal method for advocating for your rights, for your privileges, for your independence, and that there always will be casualties in the fight for equality. But Conan O'Brien, late night talk show host, my favorite comedian, and dangerously becoming close to becoming my favorite person of all time, famously said while ending the last episode of his then cancelled night show, quote, "Please don't be cynical. I hate cynicism. It's my least favorite quality and it doesn't lead anywhere. Nobody in life gets exactly what they thought they were going to get. But if you work really hard and you're kind, amazing things will happen." End quote. Ladies and gentlemen, that is my contention with the quote that I began my speech with. Like most things we humans come up with, non-violent methods have their flaws, and so do violent methods. But that does not mean that we lose hope in struggles that employ and manifest human spirit. You see, some of us sit here today as free, independent people with our share of rights that we enjoy because of the valiant sacrifices of our forefathers. On September 28th, India paid homage to the life of Bhagat Singh, a revolutionary whose actions had tremendous impact on the Indian independence movement, who employed violent methods of struggle. The Indian independence movement was a confluence of violent and non-violent struggles that coalesced in the end into a mass agitation movement due to the non-violent Gandhian principles. Principles that, if not employed during the time, might have delayed the independence or even decreased or even increased casualties on both sides of the war. And in that case, non-violence triumphs. But this also does not give us the right to question communities who are forced to resort to violent means. It's almost irresponsible on our part to question these communities and their justification, not if their cause is just. We need to remember that no well-thinking community in pursuance of a noble cause would wish to sustain the casualties violence inevitably will bring upon them. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ajman Khan, and I believe that the quote, non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Though it contains a shred of the truth, is unnecessarily cynical. And perhaps a better way to put it is that non-violence and violence are two admittedly flawed means to a cause that, if used appropriately to complement each other's weaknesses, can bring about a staggering amount of change. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Arun School. Next coming up is JSS School. Can we quickly go to JSS International?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sarah Pereira is there and the spotlight is on you. Enjoy your performance.
Yes,
All
sir,
the
thank
best.
Non-violence is not to be used ever as the as the shield of the coward. It is the weapon of the brave. Truer words were not spoken by Mahatma Gandhi, leader of the Indian independence movement and pioneer of the philosophy and strategy of non-violence. So it seems only fitting that we are gathered here today on his birthday to celebrate International Non-Violence Day. Good afternoon, respected judges and my dear audience. I am Sarah Pereira of JSS International School, here to take you on a journey, by the end of which I hope my message is conveyed with the utmost clarity. Every mighty waterfall was once a little stream, every glorious mountain a rock. And so in this manner, it seems only natural that our story should start at the very beginning, right? Wrong. I will start at the end. The year was 1704. The Battle of Blenheim had just been fought between the armies of England and France. Though England had established supremacy and won, it was far from a joyous occasion. Not when thousands of people's homes had been destroyed, when the gunfire had laid waste to the entire country, and the displaced civilians who were forced to flee to escape the war. In such a moment, or any moment of war, one could swear that the atrocities committed outweigh the feeling of pride and victory felt by the nation, for it was the people who had suffered. When many a childing mother and newborn died, and the bodies of the soldiers seemed to decorate the ground, did no one hope or strive for a peaceful solution? To hope for an alternative where this never happened? We will never know what that felt like. I do not mean to dishearten you in giving you this anecdote. Instead, I hope to highlight the absurdity and senselessness of violence. There is a reason people throughout the ages have condemned the use of violence. People like Alice Paul, Gene Sharp, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi have made it their life's work to advocate and uphold the principle of nonviolence. So now the million-dollar question: what is nonviolence and why is it so important? It is not just the personal practice of being harmless to oneself and others under every condition, as so monotonously defined by a dictionary. It is so much more than that. It is a necessary key for the healthy functioning of a society. It deserves far more attention than we choose to give it. For it is in embracing nonviolence that we take a step closer to achieving a world that is more peaceful, safer, that is more just, without the use of violence as a tool. Nonviolence is a force for transformation, which results in the well-being of all, without the use of any passive or brutal measures. And so, in order to confront and denounce the practice of violence, we must first understand it. To do so, we may divide violence into three parts: speech, action, thought. It seems basic enough when you divide it like that, and yet it is the basics in which we falter at. How can we hope to build a better tomorrow when our today is filled with prejudice and suffering? So we shall look at the three types of violence. The first, speech. Hurting a fellow human being by using harsh words. Inciting a riot using hate-filled speech is no less a crime than physically abusing somebody. The second type, action, the most commonly interpreted. And the third, thought, seemingly harmless, yet one of the most deadly. Non-violence can only be brought about when these three are completely eradicated. That is, violence of action, thought, and speech. The only question now is, how long will it take for people to realize that we cannot use violence as a force to produce positive change? To combat injustice with violence is to rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic. Poetically tragic, added to the fact that it brings about little favorable change in the situation. If stories do not move you, then perhaps facts will. Political scientist Erica Chowanworth has spent her life dedicated to researching the statistics of non-violent campaigns, and her studies point to a unanimous vote. Studies show that between 2000 and 2006, 70% of non-violent campaigns have succeeded. That is over 5 times the success rate of violent ones. Thus, non-violence has been shown to be more effective in than violence in overthrowing a repressive government or resisting foreign occupation. Perhaps more importantly, it is more fruitful in the long term due to its creative, cooperative, and coercive nature. Therefore, to make the world a better place, it is important to shun violence completely and understand and implement non-violence. For as Martin Luther King once said, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, JSS International. Let us go to the next contestant. Is the next contestant ready? From Gyan Mandir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can't see you. Okay, Garima?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you are spotlighted. All the best, dear.
I would like you to imagine that you live in a very repressive country. There are elections, but the leader wins 100% of the votes every time. Security forces beat up the opposition leaders and harass everyone else. Now let's say you've had enough, and so many other people you've talked to in soft whispers. No, I'm not talking about the Hunger Games, although that would be awesome. Unfortunately, I'm talking about real world conditions that people face right now. Assuming that you have decided to act, what will be the best way to challenge the system and create something new? Or let's make this question easier. Will you choose a violent or a non-violent resistance method? Good afternoon, everyone. Today, on this auspicious occasion of Gandhi Jayanti, the birthday of the most far-sighted, strong-willed, and a figure revered by all, I'm here to put forth my views on non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. And I totally agree with the statement. Non-violence is not a garment to be put on and off at will. Its seat is in the heart, and it must be an inseparable part of our being. I can totally understand your perspective when you counter me and say that statements like those were quoted 150 years ago. But when we talk about bringing down a government, if the option non-violent resistance cannot be chosen, violent resistance isn't an option at all. Just as only light can brighten the darkness, violence cannot be deemed by violence but non-violence. This may be naive to people, but when we drill into data, non-violent campaigns succeed more than the violent ones. Not by melting the hearts of the opponents. Instead, they tend to succeed because non-violent methods have a greater potential for eliciting mass participation. On an average, they elicit about 11 times more participants than the average armed uprising would do. And because this is the source of the major power shifts within the opponent's regime. Now that we have an answer to what should be done, let's move to other frequent and common question. Why has non-violence tended to be more effective than violence? Of course, a moral and ethical question about using violence by killing people in the name of a cause, whatever the cause may be. But even if we put the ethical and moral questions aside, say we are not interested for a movement in ethical or moral implications of violence, if we just purely look at whether violence works or not, we will find that more often than not, violence actually makes situations worse. And that non-violent methods on a whole are far more effective than violent ones. And that's for a number of reasons. People who use violence think that violence has a mobilizing effect, that if people see acts of terrorism, they believe that the revolution is coming and this is the time to join the revolution. In reality, of course, violence actually does not mobilize people. It divides movements. It actually creates disintegration of movements, and quite often it actually puts people off joining movements. So violence doesn't have a mobilizing impact but the opposite. Another assumption of people who use violence is that governments are paper tigers and they can be easily brought down if you're using only the right acts of violence. If you're only manipulating the situation through few acts of symbolic terrorism. The reality, on the other hand, is that this sort of an assumption is based on almost ideal conditions. In most cases, governments do not easily give in to violence. So people end up in a situation that violence does not go in bringing down the government, but destroying your own movements. Non-violent forms of resistance are actually being proven to be more effective than the violent ones. Naturally, not all non-violent campaigns succeed, but in cases where they failed, there was no systematic evidence to suggest that violent uprisings would have performed any better. Indeed, non-violence would be a flop. It may be a failure, but violence is not the answer, and neither it helps anyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Gyan Mandir Public School, Delhi. Next coming up is Delhi World Public School, Ajmer.
I'm here.
Okay, that's a quick one. I need to find you again. Okay, can you switch your fan because there is sound from the fan?
Just a minute, sir. Just a minute.
Sure. This will help you, dear. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the next contestant from Delhi World Public School, Ajmer, Rajasthan, India. Over to you, dear. Enjoy.
A very good evening to the August gathered here. I'm Akshara Shekhawat from Delhi World Public School, Ajmer, which is in Rajasthan, India. Speaking on the topic, non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Non-violence doesn't always work, but violence never does. This quote by Madge Mitchell Cyrus is the crux of my speech today. Violence and non-violence are urbane concepts. If the abstract ethics of non-violence were to be imposed on the natural environment, climate systems would collapse and we would all be dead within weeks. Much of what is considered progress and normality is actually imbued with a hyper-violence most of us remain blissfully unaware about. For the sake of cheap furniture, game consoles, and fizzy drinks, we have converted complex woodlands into lumber yards, animals into generic products, oceans into dwindling fish farms, humans into cogs in a machine, and paradise into parking lots. Who amongst us think that buying factory farmed meat produced from animals reared in concentration camps is more violent than destroying the household of those who produce it? Which amongst us believe that the industrial scale processes leading to the sixth extinction of species are more violent than forcefully attacking the headquarters of those responsible for it? Few, if any. The violence, the corporate state coalition who controls the narrative and owns the monopoly on violence inflicts upon the web of life is astronomical in comparison to anything the victims and activists could dream of doing in response. The modern mind does not believe in such talk. Violence is bad, all violence, or so we have been led to believe. From most angles, it appears a laudable belief. But there is one angle that we keep missing, and in our current climate, it's a crucial one. This is not an argument for mindless violence. It's an argument against mindless non-violence. It should be obvious that tackling the major social and ecological injustices is the first port of call. Which of us wants more violence in a world already riddled with it? What we must understand, however, is that in persisting with ineffectual tactics, we are failing those we seek to help. Inasmuch as it is ineffective, non-violent protest, in spite of its best intentions, cannot help but end up in yet more violence, albeit concealed, removed, and sanitized. Nobel Peace Prize winner Nelson Mandela once said, "For me, non-violence was not a moral principle, but a strategy. There is no moral goodness in using an ineffective weapon." This isn't to say that violence is always a safe bet for success, or there aren't times when it hasn't been used just as atrociously as establishment wields it. Yet, just as there are times when non-violent means are appropriate, there will also be times when it is not. It is in these moments when we must decide how far we are willing to go in order to protect what needs protecting. And if we are not willing to go that far, perhaps it simply isn't in our nature to do so. We live in a time of tough choices, where there is often no prospectively right or wrong solution. Wise discernment is as important as it has always been. If much of the beauty of the world is not to be only preserved, but also enhanced, we might do well in concerning ourselves a little less about our protests being non-violent and a little more about our actions being effective. The political landscape needs rewinding too, argues Mark Boyle in his essay opposing mindless non-violence. It is a spectacle that is becoming all too familiar. Captured on the ubiquitous smartphones, intimidated protesters scurry away from a scene of unprovoked police violence. This is a peaceful protest, they declare, words uttered as much in anxious defense as they were in defiance of the batons, rubber bullets, pepper spray, and tear gas that comes their way. Admirable as the words seem, the protesters are mistaken. By way of its fundamentalist approach to non-violence, protests today are anything but peaceful. When non-violence is deemed to have failed, people bend towards ways which lead to violence. We should just let go, forget the past, and live for the future. When being used nowadays, non-violence is a flop because you use it in places where it isn't supposed to be used. People create an image of non-violent protest when in reality, all we had to do was go with the flow. Being an ardent Indian that I am, you will naturally expect me to support non-violence by following Mahatma Gandhi. Fortunately or unfortunately, I am one of those people who don't want to step into Mahatma's shoes. I respect him with all my heart and soul for the work he did for the country, but I'm not someone to follow his footsteps. I believe that the revolutionaries also had a great impact in igniting the spark of fight in the Indian independence. However, I do agree when Mr. Gandhi said that, in theory, if there is sufficient non-violence developed in any single person, he should be able to discover the means of combating violence, no matter how widespread or severe, within his jurisdiction. The three most the three most distinguished examples of advocacy of a policy of non-violence in modern history were moved by moral convictions. The three being Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and the pacifist movement of the 20th century. When a sovereign state is deeply opposed to its internally upheld social conditions, the best example to put forward is of Martin Luther King Jr., whose policies represent the situation perfectly. He and his followers advocated the fact that the southern states of USFA are to be challenged by a series of non-violence rights. By contrast, in the scenario of colonialism, Mahatma Gandhi endorsed the concept of non-violence in the context of foreign occupation. They opposed the British from oppressing India. By further contrast, the pacifist movement was in context with interstate relations. You might say that all these movements were successful, but then, my friends, let me remind you that all this would have been unnecessary only if people wouldn't have been thirsty for power. This elucidates the impression that whether it is violence or non-violence, the people doing it end up getting hurt in one way or the other. Now, I would like to end my speech with a few words. We should learn from the follies of our past and live for the future. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Delhi World Public School, Ajmer. Next coming up is APS Hisar. Can we quickly go to Hisar? Oh my God, what's that? Okay. APS Hisar, are you ready?
Yes, sir. Am I audible and visible both?
Yes. Thank you very much for confirming.
Okay.
Okay. All the best. Enjoy.
Thank you, sir. Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the infinity of man. Non-violence is not a garment that will put on in offices. It is a seed in the heart. And it must be in here. Today, Ayachika, on behalf of Army Public School SR, is going to share my views on the given topic. Non-violence is flop, but the bigger flop is violence. Every day, somewhere or other, we come across the word ahimsa, non-violence, adamit ashadu. Why these words are used so much? Why this ideology has so much concentration? To find this answer, one should look behind at our history, India's independence history. Everyone speaks, but no one follows it. There's so many examples, then also no one followed this path. Path of ahimsa, the path of non-violence is path of peace. What is the value to speak about it? First of all, let's see what this word means about. What the word non-violence means. It is a policy, practice of refraining from the use of violence and keep ourselves away from any type of argument. The only thing we have to do is keep ourselves. So my question to you is which path you are going to take, the path of a difficult one which leads you at a beautiful destination, or easy one which will lead to loss and regret. Choose the path which will provide you happiness, the path which will provide you benefits, the path which will provide you satisfaction, benefit not of money but of pleasure, satisfaction, honor. It is always a mystery to me how man can feel honored by the humiliation of their fellow beings. We have an example. The father of our nation, Mahatma Gandhi, who changed the minds of thousands. He inspired people all over the world to achieve that. He didn't invent any new ideology or concept. He just remembered the people the missing concept of non-violence. Recall, Gandhiji, I have nothing new to teach the world. I have nothing new to teach this world. Truth and non-violence are as old as hills. All I have done is to experiment in both as a vast scale as I could. No doubt, the path of non-violence is very difficult and will consume a lot of time. Enough. You have to follow this path because difficult paths always lead to beautiful destination. And if you believe in yourself, then slow and steady, you will win the race. Now I want to talk to you today about another definition of non-violence, which is even more relevant to today's times of global calamities and uncertainty, because non-violence means avoiding not only external physical violence but also internal violence and the spirit. By supporting non-violence, one can not also refuse to shoot a man but also refuse to hate him. It simply means that we should not hatred, we should not discriminate, intolerance, and such negative feelings take over our entire space. You should not let anyone walk into your mind with their dirty feet. As the first principle of non-violence action is that non-cooperation with the things which humiliate others, non-cooperation with violence. If someone slap on one side of your face, turn another one to him. The best way to stop violence. I'm sure you will have heard this line that an eye to eye keep hands with the blind world. Where there is any war or any type of violence, the destruction takes place on the both sides. It doesn't mean that one side will face some type of destruction and other will be safe. Never ever. Because war is only a cloudy escape from the problem of peace. There is no greatness where there is no simplicity, goodness, and truth. Even when violence seems like good choice, I always oppose this. I oppose violence because the violence for good is a temporary good. It always ends with permanent evil. Hence, it is your choice because everyone must decide that whether you want to walk in the light of altruism or in the darkness of selfishness. So to end my speech, I would say that if we want to create a world of peace, if we want to create a world of non-violence and carry out a real war against war, we shall have to begin with the children because they are the creators of the coming future. It is on us to teach them cooperation rather than completion, acceptance rather than outright rejection, because only then we can hope to create a generation of compassionate individuals who will find solution to future problems rather than creating an issue, rather than creating a bigger problem of the problem, not by being aggressive and dominating, but by being nurturing and acceptive. Then only he or she will able to walk on the path of non-violence. And you can see in the world that nowadays everyone has forgot the concept of non-violence and are just walking on the path of violence. Why to finish everything? Why they are talking? Why they are talking? If they doesn't only want to walk, why they are talking so much? So this is my request to you all that if you can make a small children understand that the path of non-violence is the path of peace. There's nothing in doing any type of violence because children is like a plain paper. What you write, he becomes. So we can avoid this to happen in a childhood only. So can we do this all? So thank you very much for listening me. I'm giving review. Have a nice day ahead and a very, very happy Gandhi Jayanti. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear. Thank you very much. Next, we have India International School Sharjah Girls Branch. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Lovely, lovely. So all the best, dear. Enjoy your time.
Good afternoon. The most respected judges and my dear friends, it is my privilege and pleasure to speak in front of you on this topic. Violence is flop. The only bigger flop is non-violence. At the outset, I feel happy and thankful for this tricky topic, which is the most required and relevant in today's world. Earlier, we have been brought in our home in such a way to be kind and caring to our fellow beings. Our grandparents and parents nurtured us to be kind-hearted and helpful to others by making us sleep, telling us fine moral bedtime stories. But is it possible to be kind in all the circumstances? When we get into school and further, we come across various people like friends, mates, fellow people, etc. Some are kind, some are optimistic, some are jovial, playful, some are casual, some are emotional, some are crazy as well. My friends, we can never say some people are bad. In my opinion, no one is bad. Yes, no one is bad. It all depends the way we think and look at the people. If each of us can acknowledge the goodness of the others, non-violence will never be a flop. Even though we ought to be good with our friends, at times we face trouble with them. As we all know, helping is good. Sometimes we get exploited while we try to help others. Thus, virtue gets diminished. Overall, it is hidden but not lost. My significance on this topic is either violence or non-violence would be a flop. They win or lose based on one's thoughts, perceptions, beliefs, and actions. Let me get into a topic with few illustrations. It is an undisputable bit of fact that violence does exist in this society today. Wars, killings, vengeance, vandalism, even this pandemic is also said to be a cause of violence. In order to get rid of these violent situations, we should adopt pacifism and practice peace. We should completely stop discrimination. Our beliefs and thoughts make our character. At times, our thoughts are driven by the circumstances. I would say violence is born either out of fear or greed. For example, when a violent tiger attacks a deer to death, the incident creates a strong feeling to the deer to attack the tiger back, but it cannot. The circumstance of the deer is creating a thought in the deer family to practice violence so that it can attack the tiger. This is a chain reaction that spreads slowly and violence takes place out of fear. We can observe the same behavior in human beings as well. Similarly, if one cannot recognize goodness of others and win over and over the other fellow being, violence takes place out of greed. As Mother Teresa says, do even small things with great love. If we follow this, violence will fail. The solution I would recommend and wish that we must practice the sayings of peace winners. Every country should promote peacemaking practices as a strategy. Yoga is yet another renowned way of developing the inner peace in human. I recommend to practice yoga in order to maintain the thoughts and actions in a pacifying manner. Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, Malala Yousafzai, Barack Obama, Kailash Satyarthi, Nadia Murad are remarkable winners of Nobel Prize for Peace. As Martin Luther King said, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character is the goal of true education. We should remember Mahatma Gandhi for the Satyagraha, which followed the virtue of ahimsa. India achieved freedom on 15th August 1947. This was the greatest win of non-violence in the human history. Violence is jeopardy, whereas non-violence is the pinnacle of bravery. As a conclusion, I would like to say that amidst sufferings, we have to come up bravely, fight against the violence, and should spread positive thoughts in the society. If each and every human embrace pacifism, our home planet will bloom in peace. Thank you for the opportunity. Long live humanity.
Thank you very much. That was India International School Sharjah Girls Branch. We are moving to Alwar. Alwar Public School, Rajasthan,
So am
India.
I visible and am I audible?
You need to wait, girl. I need to spot you first. Yes.
Am I
Now,
visible and audible?
yes, please enjoy your time.
Joan Baez, an American activist and singer, once remarked, "Non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence." To ponder upon this great saying today, I, Lipi Agarwal from Alwar Public School, Rajasthan, India, would like to present my views in front of you all. When we live in a world full of injustice, we need to and have to rise against it. I rise against injustice, I protest, and to make my voice heard more clearly, I start blocking roads where there could be an ambulance too. I ignite up a riot situation and let my anger overflow into a violent rage. Now, who will rise against me? Someone has to, as I am doing as strong as the injustice I rose against. This is what violence does. It leads to a vicious cycle of hatred and injustice. So violence in itself is the problem and hence cannot be the solution. What is the alternative then? Non-violence. Non-violence may be a bigger flop, but it works. It works more than violence. Why should we choose the path of brutality, bloodshed, and pain if the solution can work out peacefully? This justifies the existence of international bodies like the United Nations. And remember, my friends, virtues are always worshipped and vices despised. No matter what form, what intention, violence continues to remain a vice, a societal evil. Why do you think some movements that are of so great importance fail to get noticed by the government or fail to get the respect they deserve or fail to make that impact? Because all those movements chose the wise way, not the wise way, and failed miserably. So there are two ways to choose from. The first, the violent way. And most will choose this. Why? Because it is the easiest way. The second, the harder one, which no one tends to think of easily, is the non-violent way. But why is it the harder way? Because it requires mental strength, not muscle strength. It requires great minds, not great positions. It requires patience. Patience to a level where you can actually appeal to the conscience of the oppressor. Mahatma Gandhi, while explaining his idea of satyagraha and non-violence, remarked, "Without seeking vengeance, one could win a battle by appealing to the conscience of the oppressor." Non-violence is not what you think it is, no. It is not just a weapon to resist outside forces like violence is. It helps you fight your inner evils. It is something you observe in daily life, how you react to everyday situation. From supporting a vegan diet to handling children with patience. From refraining from hurting ourselves to being a calm driver on road. From resolving conflicts peacefully to practicing meditation. Non-violence is a part of human growth. And to all those who argue that violence is necessary in situation of extreme oppression and extreme suppression, let me state a heartwarming instance to you. When told to write about how they would punish Hitler for the misdeeds he did, all the students had their own violent way. But this one student wrote that he would put him in black skin and let him live in America so that he realizes what it feels to be oppressed. This teaches us, do not beget hate with hatred. That just makes you crueler than the next person. Violence is that acid that burns you more from inside than it can burn outside. Even if violence seems to be working at first, and it will, In the long term, it does more harm to you than to others. It does more harm to the inflictor than to the inflicted. It leaves deep scars which I do not think can heal easily. Alfred Nobel, an extraordinary person and a rather extraordinary scientist, was scarred by seeing the destruction his inventions had caused and ended up taking his life. He tried to compensate the destruction caused by his armaments and his dynamites, but what help is regret? And can monetary compensation ever compensate the loss of life? Reiterating my views, I will appeal all of you to reconsider the way you live, the way you behave, because the root of hatred lies within us and we do not even realize. It is a universal truth. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only bright light can do that. And in the end, I will leave you pondering upon these lines. Love cannot prevail. Love cannot fail. Let us all not fail love by asking all of us to fight. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you very much. That was Alwar Public School, Rajasthan, India. Let us go from Rajasthan to Gujarat. The Aditya Birla Public School. Are you there? Aditya Birla Public School. The final call for Aditya Birla Public School, Gujarat. Okay, moving on. We have Sanskriti International School, Kathmandu, Nepal. Do we have the girl
Hello.
ready?
Yes.
Ramro.
Sir, can I start now?
Ramro to you.
Thank you, sir.
And
Non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Before Mahatma Gandhi, people thought that if they wanted independence, the only solution was to revolt and pursue violence. But the time has changed, and Mahatma Gandhi has changed the perception of many people like us. He taught us that to achieve independence, violence is not required. He believed in ahimsa paramo dharma, which means that non-violence is the highest moral virtue. Today is Gandhi Jayanti, and I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the believers of non-violence. On the same day, the whole world celebrates the International Day of Non-Violence. Good afternoon, I'm Anushan Samarajan from Sanskriti International School, representing Nepal in this virtual podium. I would like everyone present here to imagine yourselves living in a peaceful society, and then later, a desolate society. A peaceful society is one where no one engages in violence. There may be disagreements, but they solve it by discussing. There is tolerance and there is no discrimination. In a peaceful society, there's a feeling of brotherhood and togetherness. On the other hand, in the desolate society, there are people suffering to make ends meet. One higher group discriminates the lower group. There's lack of tolerance, and power is used to control other groups. Disagreement leads to hatred, revenge, and animosity. Out of these two groups, which one would you prefer to live in? The answer is obvious: the peaceful society. Now, let us think. Can a society built on the foundation of violence ever be peaceful? One obsessed group revolts and consequently leads to the downfall of the group in power. Then again, we will have similar power dynamic. The only difference is a change in the position of the groups. This vicious cycle of oppressing and being oppressed never ends. The victory and celebration post-war is very short-lived. So is violence a hit or a flop? Non-violence, a road less traveled to bring change, may be very remote and may be extremely difficult. This road may require a group of people who are resilient and who won't be swayed by their inner feelings of anger and would do something terrible. Perhaps this is where most people give up on non-violence. Non-violence requires us to think critically, which is hard to do when we're suffering and angry. Realizing or not being able to realize this, most people go for violence first, because violence doesn't give us much time thinking about it or while doing it. So, for whatever reason, people choose violence first, and non-violence fails to be their first option. So, whenever you are confused about whether to choose between violence and non-violence, remind yourself about the sustainable and peaceful society you are aiming at. Martin Luther King, a social activist who played a key role in the civil rights movement, once said, "Nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon, which cuts without wounding and ennobles the man who wields it. It is a sword that heals." Using violence not just puts the lives of the people you're fighting against on the line, but also yours and the people you're fighting for. It may work, but only to bring a small and specific change. Violence destructs instead of forming. The only thing it forms is harm, and it's not just physical harm that it causes. It also causes long-lasting mental and emotional harm. Violence is not an option. It should never have been an option. Using violence not just affects the people involved negatively, but it also affects countless innocent people. We can cite examples of many civil wars. It is more than common to see innocent people being affected by it, countless lives lost, an insane number of people left homeless, and unimaginable left alone. Even when the protest ends, the suffering doesn't. One glaring example could be the Yemen crisis. It started out as a group of people trying to bring political change, but now it's a crisis, and the conditions have only gotten worse. It has affected countless people in Yemen, even those that weren't involved. Is it really worth it to bring such a small change in exchange for countless lives lost, an insane amount of people left homeless, and unimaginable left alone? I think not. Non-violence may fail to be our first choice, but violence, it's an overall failure to humanity. Hence, it makes me question why we're still having to discuss on whether violence is a hit or not, when it's clearly not. All it brings is destruction and chaos. If you think nonviolence is a flop, then remember, the only bigger flop is violence. Thank you.
Thanks to you, dear. Can we quickly go to Balbharti School? Balbharti Public School, Delhi. Are you there? The final call for Balbharti Public School, Delhi, India. Okay. So next, moving on, we have Sehwag International School, Haryana.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good evening, sir.
So Bharti, good evening, and you are spotlighted already. Enjoy your moment, dear.
Sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, am I visible accurately?
No, so now you have switched your camera off.
Okay, sir. Can you give me a moment?
Yes, please. Yeah. Can you switch off the light behind you, because that is
Yes, sir. Sir, wait a minute.
okay.
Light 120. Hold. So now it's
Yeah,
visible?
this is better. Yes.
Okay.
Make
You.
yourself comfortable, and Please see that your camera doesn't get stopped. Over to you, dear.
Sir, actually, it's a network issue. It may fluctuate sometimes.
Okay.
So that's not the issue, na?
No, if it is a longer time, then we might have a problem with that, because then there is a suspicion that child is reading. We trust everyone,
Okay, sir.
but to
Yes,
keep
sir.
it fair competition, we have to abide by
Yes,
the
sir.
rules. Over to you, dear.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Non-violence is mightier than the mightiest violence. Good evening, respected judges, teachers, and my fellow mates. I am Bharti Char from Sewak International School, India. I'm going to deliver my speech on my topic, non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. As we all know that this day is celebrated to give the honor to the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, which is also known as Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and we also name him as Bapuji. This day is very popular for him and is also celebrated internationally as International Day of Non-Violence. Non-violence has active or activist elements in that believers generally accept the need for non-violence as active or activist elements, which need non-violence as a means to spread social political change. Thus, for example, Tolstoy and Gandhism is both a philosophy and strategy for social change that rejects the use of violence, but at the same time, it sees an oppressive or armed struggle against it. In modern times, non-violence has been a very effective method for bringing non-violent methods is very easy for people to bring peace in their country. There are many examples which have followed the philosophy of non-violence, like Mahatma Gandhi's decades-long violent struggle against British rule in India, and Martin Luther King Jr. and James Bevel's adoption of Gandhi's non-violent methods in their campaigns to win civil rights for African Americans. As we all know, that non-violence is used as a word for peace, and it's also used as a synonym for it. Non-violence is very, very important for to bring peace in our country. Applying the principles of non-violence can reduce anger, conflict, and violence on personal, local, national, and global levels. As we all know, that non-violence has been a powerful strategy for students, communities, disenfranchised groups, and whole societies in bringing and transforming conditions. Applying the principles of non-violence is very easy and very effective. Non-violence is a very powerful strategy, as we have know that we can use it without using violence. And non-violence brings peace to the country. There are 6 principles led by Martin King Jr. in his book Stride Towards Freedom. Principle 1, non-violence brings peace to the country. Principle 2, non-violence is a very effective method for courageous people. Principle 3, non-violence helps to create us friendship and understanding. Principle 4, non-violence reduces non-violent methods, reduces violence and creates friendship and understanding. Principle 5, non-violence did not create violence but creates understanding in the people. Here, non-violent methods are reduces violence. Here is some methods which were non-violent methods do not they show evil people are also victims and not evil people. Evil people are also victims and not violence is very, very important to the country. The central notion or truth is central to Gandhian conception of non-violence. Gandhiji saw truth as something that is multifaceted and unable to be grasped in its entity by any one individual. All carry pieces of truth, but he believed all needed pieces of others' truth in order to bring peace in the country. I would like to conclude with the passage from Mahabharata, which emphasizes the cardinal importance of ahimsa in Hinduism and literally means ahimsa is the highest virtue Ahimsa is the greatest sacrifice. Ahimsa is the most peaceful feeling. Ahimsa is the best suffering. Ahimsa is wonderful thing to the country. Ahimsa is the highest truth, and ahimsa is the greatest teaching of all. Thank you, everyone, and really have a nice day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sehwag International School, Haryana. Next, moving on to Bluebells School International, Delhi.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
And you are spotted. All the
Great. Am
best.
I audible? Okay. Non-violence is a flop. The only bigger flop is violence. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arushi Handa, and I'm a student of Bluebell School International, India. Taking into consideration my life in the past 6 months, I think it is safe to say that I detest online platforms. But sitting here confined to my board in front of this screen, which well stifles my creativity, I really start to question. Is confinement and cooperation not better than rampant positive cases? If virtual engagement helps save lives, is it not the preferred option here? Now, this is somewhat similar to the debate we have on a focal issue since the advent of civilizations in all periods of history, the issue of violence and non-violence. One might argue non-violence is a failure, for the success of non-violence lies in the ability of the opponent to reflect on his or her own actions. They must be prepared to recognize that they could possibly be wrong, or else the protests and rallies would bear no fruit. Another might argue violence is a bigger failure, for it adversely affects combatants and non-combatants alike, both physically and emotionally. For violence only causes pain. For violence is never a cure to pain. Let's start first by looking at what non-violence really refers to. Non-violence as a policy postulates the theory that the use of force is inherently abhorrent. But a simpler way to look at it is by quoting John Baez, who says, "That's all non-violence is, organized love." To many people, this next statement that I'm about to make may seem a bit naive, but as a response to what I stated above, non-violent campaigns don't succeed by melting the hearts of their opponents. Instead, they succeed because they have a greater potential for eliciting mass participation. And we do have evidence of the same throughout history. During the national movement, Gandhi took used it to fight not only colonial rule, but social evils such as racial discrimination and untouchability. He thought that non-violence was a tool for the brave. The ideal community that Dr. King envisaged could only be forged through non-violent means. Only non-violence, he believed, had the power to break the cycle of retributive violence and create lasting peace through reconciliation. But then again, ladies and gentlemen, while we appreciate the outcomes, we must not blind ourselves to the short-lived impact of these movements. The very fact that the caste system is so deeply entrenched in our country that we as a democratic republic still cannot treat socially backward classes the same, this just goes on to prove that the freedom won was not extended to everyone. Yet another pertinent example is the fact that non-violence is still met and dealt with violence. And the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and many parts of the world are proof of that. Violence, on the other hand, in its most tangible form, is routine, inescapable, mundane, and is one of the most problematic issues that we as a society face today. The prima facie of violence is extremely grand, and it is often associated with war, civic strife, and riots. But ladies and gentlemen, we need to put this preconceived notion of violence under a microscope to realize that violence at the grassroots level stems from households in our microsystem, in the form of domestic violence at home, bullying in school, ragging in colleges, road rage on streets and highways, booth capturing, religious conflicts even. We cannot turn a blind eye to these forms of violence that lie so thinly veiled behind all institutions surrounding us. For this blindness cannot lead to insight.
Again, one might ask, when one is aware of the ills of violence and aggression, then why does one resort to violent means? Emotional insecurity is the answer. And as Isaac Asimov aptly put it, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. I have come to realize that as social beings, we humans desire to be secure and wanted. It is how we are fundamentally wired. Yet we have somehow deemed it in our nature to live in the fear of each other, to control each other, and therefore we try to justify our urge to resolve conflict through violent means. But ladies and gentlemen, I question you. Is violence really the answer? It is not. The world that we live in today is foundering in a vicious soup of moral confusion, hypocrisy, and error. In all nooks and crannies of society, everyone, it seems, expresses concern over our lack of moral compass. We hear endlessly of a national, indeed worldwide, need to end the violence. This obsessive focus on violence reveals much about the moral retardation of our time. As Michael Berg said, as long as people use violence to combat violence, we will always have violence. It is time, ladies and gentlemen, to finally combat violence with compassion, kindness, understanding, and most importantly, non-violence. Violence has and always will lead to destruction. Thank you.
Thanks to you, dear, for providing us with lots of information. Can we quickly go to the next speaker? That is from...
Yes, sir.
Yes, one second. Yes.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Iris Mehta. And today, I'm going to show you why non-violence is way better than violence. So I think I'm in an age where I question everything. I question this, I question that. I question why my school separates male and female, even though we're practically the same. I guess I'll never know. But there was this question I had when I was a young kid. What would I do when I feel violence? Should I face him? For example, in school, if I see a bully, should I go directly and fight him? If I do that, I essentially become a part of him. I am doing what he is doing to everyone. I become a thug. I believe that we should use non-violence against what that bully was doing. So I don't think anyone knows the power of non-violence. Let me give you an example. Burma freedom fighter Aung San Suu Kyi was popular for this incident. One day, she was going through a protest as usual when she was faced with a lot of guns, face pointed directly at her. But instead of raging and fighting the militia of armies, she told her protesters to compose themselves and sit down. And she did what I believe is the coolest thing I've ever seen. She walked up directly to the person who was pointing his gun and holded it and lowered it and told him, "Do you think this is right? Do you think this is good for you? Do you think that we are different?" At that point, he had nothing to say. He felt guilty. That was just one incident of the Burma women's fight freedom. In this situation, we saw that violence just kneeled down to non-violence, just in a flick. And also, talking about violence with the help of non-violence, I would like to example Nelson Mandela. Before he was sent into prison, he thought of using guns, bombs, and even nukes to dethrone the South African government, which is not a good idea, but he thought it that way. The reason why it's not a good idea is because people before Nelson Mandela have tried this. For example, Oliver Tambo and Bram Frischter, who has used violent methods and have failed miserably. To put that in context, the South African government at that time would kill anyone at any age, at any type, if you were from a black race. So after spending 27 years in jail from 1962 to 1989, Nelson Mandela has used the potential of non-violence. With the help of that, he dethroned one of the most oppressing and dangerous governments that the 21st century people has seen. I'm just telling stories just like the others. Let's just go into facts and figures. Two famous authors, Erica Chenworth and Ivan Perkowski, has done a research on every campaign that has been done between 2000 to 2019, including the BLM protests. In that, they have found out that a staggering 68% of every violent campaign has been led to mass deaths and destructions, while only 18% have been led for mass and destruction in non-violence. This shows the gap between violence and non-violence. And I'm not saying that non-violence is perfect, it's the best option. I'm saying that non-violence is what we need right now, what we have at best in our heart, in our hands. So there are many belligerent people who likes to have war, who has had damaging effects to this day from World War I and II, for example, Fukushima in Japan and Chernobyl in Russia. These two places, have been affected with radioactive activities. Still today, it is believed to be waiting around 1,000 years. So, ladies and gentlemen, violence is a flaw. Even non-violence is a flaw. But you should believe that non-violence could do much greater for you and your fellow beings than what violence could do you. I hope you understood, and thank you.
Yes, we have understood you very well. Thank you very much. You didn't let me invite you, but it was a beautiful speech presented by you and others. Everybody did a good job. Can I quickly go to our next and the last contestant for today? That is from MGPS. Bhanupriya, let me put a spotlight on you. Yes, now we can hear. And
in violence, we forget who we are. Acknowledging my opening lines to Mary McCarthy, I, Bhanupriya Shekhawat, would like to express my gratitude to the patrons for giving me this grand opportunity to share this prestigious platform with like-minded global citizens in times to come. Dear audience, peace comes with a priceless tag, and as John Lennon has crooned soulfully, give peace a chance. Unfortunately, in this violence-infested world, the doves have been slaughtered for raptors, vultures. One cannot switch on peace like a light. We need to work on, for, and towards it. The question that evokes in this context is the arising of global awareness that peace is the end to the beginning of all wars, as it is indivisible. The question of nonviolence rises when we fail to check the violence in the mind where it belongs to. Today's motion echoes the opinion of Jian Deis. The only thing that has been a worse flop than the organization of non-violence has been the organization of violence. As the Holy Bible says, all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. August audience, many of you might feel that wisdom has taught us to be calm and meek, to take one blow and turn the other cheek. But what if the rude one smites the other too? Hatred has its antidote in amity, in togetherness, in loving, sharing, and caring. As a species, let's rise above every trivial, petty, vested interest in injustice, for it is the root cause of all violence. Whenever worthy friends, freedom has been snatched, peace has failed to extinguish. As emancipation from shackles of bondage has fanned violence, there is a need to sow love where animosity breeds. But the grim fact, my friends, is that we prepare for wars like precocious giants, but for peace like retarded pygmies. Worthy friends, let's not become oblivious of the fact that a man may build himself a throne of bayonets, but he can't sit on it. The question of non-violence rises when we the question of non-violence evokes with the rise in violence, but how to alleviate this onslaught that deprives men of his humanness. Peace is a panacea, and we need to know when to blend understanding with maneuver. Dear friends, the terrible thing about violence is that the advocates of violence, who slowly and surely try to extinguish life in others, the light within them extinguishes. Radicalism, fundamentalism, the expressions are infinite, but the response is omnipotent, omnipresent, and obvious. Peace, tranquility, and serenity. But with a caution, don't make a wilderness and call it peace. Non-violence is ubiquitous for the involvement of human beings as a kind. The epic war of Mahabharata could have been averted had the Kauravas agreed to give a paltry 5 villages to the Pandavas. But Duryodhan, the Scion, refused vehemently, inviting the wrath and fury of hell let loose. Yudhishthir might have taken a compromising stance, but the former violent policy drove no good. Saturn, in Milton's Paradise Lost, has said, I make a hell of a heaven and a heaven of a hell. With unmistakable pride, he says, where am I is the heaven. So, it is the evil, cruelty within us that needs to be slayed and nailed. So, my dear friends, Joan of Arc waits for us to metamorphose into better human beings, for not always we can be forgiven as the Lord had. Cynics may criticize our beloved Bapu's principle of non-violence, but let's not forget he brought us freedom, what the earlier policies of violence could not. The response to a wrong is not a greater wrong, but the elimination of the elementary factor. Response as a carnage is not resistance, but undoubtedly not pilferage, rampage. An eye for an eye turns the whole world blind, but just as gouging eyes is not the reply, nor is it judicious to wear a cherubic smile, to forget and forgive, but to target the stimulant and not the executor. Where firmness is a staple diet, forgiving is a sin, as it encourages greater forms of violence. Tolerance of violence is a reflection of lack of grits and guts. Perpetrators of violence ought to be abhorred, condoned, but the one who accepts silent suffering deserves equal condemnation. Violence takes time to mushroom, for you are not born with it. Hence, I firmly believe that if you can learn to be violent, you can unlearn it too, as love creeps in more naturally. Violence can be built up like coral insects, for it is the merit if the weak and mighty knows how to tread the path of peace. The revenge-hungry world is faithless about non-violence. Then, since when has violence been an answer? Uprooting the cause of violence is the real path to success. Peace is hampered because a majority of us have started believing it is my way or highway. The furnace should never be ignited with violence to avenge a foe, as it might singe you too. Human aim is to become better, not bitter. So, better with violence. Forget to forgive, not because it is divine, but because we need to survive with optimism, accept deliverance, redemption leaving possibility of change and cure. Dear all, if violence would have been the answer, it would not have been a journey of Mohan to Mahatma. Thank you all for pleasant listening.
Thank you very much, my dear.